that we know a lot more now than before, and that we've got much more granular. When we were dealing with Ebola in West Africa, it was all the time trying to get down to more and more minute little geo coordinates to know where the virus was. And you kind of get the feeling that in Europe, at least, there's a lot better granularity. But gosh, each government is struggling. I mean, listening to the conversations in France, we've got this guy, Julien, he's not quite the mayor, but he's one of the mayoral council in a commune near here. And they're preparing for the winter sports. And goodness me, just when you hear the decisions they're having to deal with, they're horrible. I wouldn't want to be in a decision.
Well, this is the crisis edge between public health and politics.
Can I add something? That it's seen, they can't decide in the UK whether that's success or failure. And because I sometimes think that, I've said this before, that in public health is very reticent to engage at the political sphere, but it is about power and it's about resources, and that's very competitive.
Yeah.
And what we're having across Europe, it seems, is that the localism is either very sensible, which it doesn't seem to be accepted by all spheres as such, or it's a sense in which the granular is the fractured.
Yeah.
And I think it's really difficult. And it was shocking to hear Louise Casey yesterday talk about destitution in Liverpool, and that women being forced into prostitution. It sounded, the levels of poverty sounded 19th century, children without shoes. And it's not clear how we bring all of that together. And we seem to be not knowing how to use the information that we've got.
Yeah.
Or it's something really basic to it about what's the role of central government. And it goes right back to our first series of talks, where we didn't really know how to respond and how to bring people together. And so those systemic issues that we discussed so fully in series 1 are still there.
Yeah. Well, Annie, that's a very good curtain raiser for our discussion this morning, really. Just like to welcome one or two people. For Europe, it's a very tense time. I'd like to welcome, I'm going to just start now, I think. I'd like to welcome Professor Paul Garner, who is in Liverpool and with whom I've had a couple of phone calls recently to help me just understand a little bit more about some of the sense in the city of Liverpool, particularly before I've done TV interviews. Thank you, Paul, so much for helping. I'd like to, I'm just going to say, Anne Hendricks Jenkins, thank you for sending round lovely messages about your different groups. And I think connecting with community organizations is so important right now, and offering them space to connect with us. Not that we can help. I think the real sense I have at the moment, and sometimes is real impotence. But I thought, Anne, what you were writing was great. I did want to say hello. I saw somebody come up just now. Yeah, Anna Main. Thank you for connecting from New Zealand. I hope you're all right. And I've been having a lot of interactions with New Zealand friends about Auckland and more generally, and also with friends from Australia. I know it's a long way away from you where you are, but it feels from here that you're close. So I just wanted to say hello to you, Anna. I'd like to say hello to Dr. Shamim Talukdar. Shamim, he's always, Shamim, he's taught me that public health is politics, and he's never been scared of saying that. And so, Shamim, I was just yesterday on a seminar with the heads of various public health associations, just asking whether public health has embraced political action enough or not. And of course, there are many in British public health scene, like Professor John Ashton, who Paul and I know well, who believes that the public health community has failed because it has not been sufficiently political. And Shamim, I've learned from you that you have no fear. You just get in there and do what has to be done. Hello to Louisa, nice to see you. Hello to Georgina, thank you for joining again. Iman, thank you for joining. And I see you've put a thing in the chat already. Holly, thank you for joining. Sarah, what an amazingly interesting pair of LinkedIn comments we saw from you. Thank you very much indeed. And Claudia, you've been writing lovely stuff on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining, Claudia Batts. Haruko, welcome from Tokyo. Lovely to see you. Vicky, welcome. We're a bit Merseyside focused today, and we'll be talking that. I'd just like to say hello to Chris Langton, as always. And Chris, it's great that you found time to join us again. Really, really nice. Jan Hardacre, welcome to be with us. Magen, thank you. Welcome for joining from Gaborone in Botswana. And we'll pick up, because most of the people on this briefing have been on the previous briefings in the last few sessions. I'm going to share quite a lot of stuff in sort of real time that's going on in my life. I kind of would really value your help. And it's not just me, the whole team would. And so John's here. And I'm very pleased, and I hope, John, that you will come in. And Twee, I hope you'll come in, and my brother William as well. And please don't hesitate to come in. Catherine Deland, who's next to me, don't hesitate as well to come in if you feel you want to comment. Because as talking with the WHO people this last week, we think this is an extremely important moment in COVID. And we also feel that we've got to get it right and not make mistakes. And we've been exchanging with each other. We've got a quite delicate meeting at lunchtime today, and it's all about positioning. Before I get into that, I've got my little scripty in front of me. I do want to ask Twee just to talk a little bit about what she'd like to do, and we will use the survey again. We're looking at the survey all the time to see if we can make it better, but anyway, Twee, we're a bit busy right now, so Twee, take us into what you'd like to say.
Thank you, David. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So on the topic of connecting, let's find out who is connected today. You'll receive the poll window pop up on your screen. Please share where you're joining from, your age range, and how you're feeling. And just to say thank you to those who are active on our community chat on LinkedIn. You'll see maybe the region grouping of this poll is a bit dated now, and we should break it up in a few different ways. So I'm going to use the community chat to hear from you how you would like that split so we can better understand who's joining us. And I'm going to leave that poll open, and we'll come back and see the results later in the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Twee. So I'd like to start just with a tiny bit of news. What have we been up to this week? Well, actually, as well as working on COVID, our team in 4SD is doing a lot of work on food. And we are actually today on World Food Day. It's the 16th of October. And so during the day today, as well as talking about a summit that the United Nations is organizing on food systems next September, there's also going to be introduction to a quite extraordinary exercise that's going to take place around the world related to food. It's been given a lot of added spice by the reality that COVID has led to probably a doubling in the number of people who are poor and hungry, and possibly a similar increase in the number of children who are malnourished throughout the world. Partly the disease and partly the containment measures have led to these rather extraordinary shifts. So during the last few days, at the annual meeting of the Committee on Food Security in Rome, we've seen some of the most, I think, vibrant interactions between governments, civil society, science and business on what COVID is revealing about frailties in our global and national and local food systems. To people like Shamim, this is all very familiar because he's worked with us on food issues over the years. And I think all of you will have sensed that something has really become clear, that our food systems are not working right. So in order to prepare for this summit, the Special Envoy who's been appointed to lead it, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, is asking the people of every nation to spend a period of time during the next 8 months focusing on the kind of ideal future food system that they would like, and then to think about what that means for those who produce food, farmers and fishers, livestock keepers, as well as for those who process food, people working in different factories and so on, and as well as the whole distribution, marketing, consumption, and indeed avoiding waste of food. And it's not just thinking about food on its own, it's thinking about food and people, food and the environment, food and climate, food and water, all those other factors that are so important to our future, and putting them under the microscope through the lens of food. So if every country is going to be thinking about their pathway for sustainable food systems, and if they're going to be asked to do it quite quickly because of the summit, then there's a need for a process to make it happen. And 4SD yesterday was confirmed as the organization that will help governments and other stakeholders around the world think about the future of their food. It's going to be done through food dialogues, which are quite a structured way of bringing different actors together to talk about the future of food. And there will be progressions of dialogues in every country, plus also opportunities for dialogues organized independently by anybody. So in theory, we could see dialogues about the future of food taking place in local authority areas, in different community organizations, in schools, in universities, as well as in businesses and the like. And so this is about to be unleashed. It'll be opened up today. There's a big 24-hour relay conversation about food, and at 9 o'clock European time tonight, we're having a dialogue through the internet. But the important thing is that by November, the program of food dialogues is going to be launched. I tell you about it because if it works with food, I kind of think that we need to encourage similar dialogues about health, because these issues that we're dealing with on COVID are not simple, and the more people can be talking about them and engaging them, the better. Of course, we have to remember that there are deep politics inside these issues, and so we shouldn't be naive. And I am sometimes a bit naive, but I wanted just to share with you that this big food conversation is about to start. And that's really got me focused on the relationships between COVID and food. And I'd like to go on talking about that over time. But today, it's necessary just to do a quick review of the COVID situation, focusing globally and then honing down on Europe, and also some of the challenging issues we face about getting the narrative right so that different actors, whether they're in local government, national government, business, civil society, can actually advance it. And I'll be quick because I want to hear from all of you about what you would do from your vantage point, but also what you would do if you were in my situation right now. So a bit about my situation, still very much working as a WHO envoy, and WHO people have asked me to push myself out a little bit so that I'm available for media work. And I've been doing a fair amount of that. And I want to also get your guidance on, if you were in my shoes, what you would do in your media work and what you would do in your various conversations. So the situation is, this virus has not changed, not at all. It is still just as capable of spreading from people to people as it has always been. It seems to be just as capable of causing suffering. The long-tail COVID studies are beginning to emerge and showing the epidemiology is serious, and we must not undermine it, underplay it. And the impact on older people in terms of sickness and death is still there. So with the build-up of the virus throughout Western Europe, we now have information that in quite a number of local centres, the intensive care units are getting full, and death rates are beginning to rise. There is no respite from this virus. As we've always said, it's very local. It builds up with local outbreaks that reflect sometimes the living conditions and the working conditions of local communities. So if we look specifically at the UK, the increase in cases is greatest in Northern Ireland, Northern England, and Central Scotland. In Spain, it's Madrid, and it's in the north. In France, it's Paris, Marseille, and some other big cities. Look further across in Europe, it's in Belgium, Netherlands, and Czech Republic. And it's sometimes very difficult to work out why it's building up in a particular place. And I think it's a combination of people's wealth and therefore their ability to navigate and to having less exposure, together with luck. But there's a bit of anxiety that social movement among younger people is very much driving the spread of disease. There is not going to be a kind of let-off for Europe. It's not going to be that there will be a low death rate. The death rates will pick up. They will just come later. And I think that point has to continue to be made. And it will get worse in Europe as the weather gets colder. So first thing, therefore, is to stress that there is a really major challenge that needs attention. So different governments have tried encouraging their people to reduce physical contact and to protect themselves. They've also tried to set up basic infection control services in the community to test people and to isolate them if they've got disease. But it hasn't really worked. I was asked this morning, why hasn't it worked? And I said, there's just one, I think, very strong reason, and that is that Europe has not had to cope with infectious disease outbreaks in the last few decades. Perhaps HIV, yes, but not infectious disease that's transmitted through droplets from respiratory secretions. And actually, it's proved to be much harder for European countries to establish the honeycomb or lattice of community-based health services that you need to deal with a problem like this. And indeed, I find that for many, even understanding what we're talking about when we use the term public health is hard. Because as soon as you use the word health in a conversation, people immediately think hospitals or health centers. But we're not. We're talking about a way of maintaining surveillance of health in the community. What one needs to have when you're dealing with infectious diseases, because you need to be able to pick up quickly when there's a spike coming, and then you need to be able to isolate the people with the disease and isolate their contacts. It's not changed for decades, the basics of dealing with infectious disease, but I kind of sense it's been forgotten about. So as I talk to people about what's happening in Europe right now, whether it's in media or in government or in business, they present it to me as a choice between either extreme movement restrictions, which are sometimes referred to when they're the most extreme as lockdown, or letting it go and letting everybody get ill and hoping that some kind of community immunity develops. And now we've got two kind of polarized positions. The lockdown position, sometimes a bit embellished, it's called a circuit breaker if it's a short-term lockdown. Sometimes it's a very tight lockdown, sometimes it's a bit softer, perhaps a night curfew, but daytime activity allowed, with limitations on the numbers of people who can meet. And then the other extreme is presented as the herd immunity approach. And this week in Europe, that's been the dominant narrative, lockdown versus herd immunity. And you know from our discussions, that's not what we're saying at all. We're saying there is a middle path, the correct path, the path that everybody should be following, which is one of being able to deal with transmission by interrupting it and to suppress outbreaks through effective, rapid action. But we're not penetrating with our middle message. We are stuck in the terms of a debate that's being created by others, which is broadly said, lockdown versus herd immunity. Of course, the reason why we're stuck in that debate is that that is the way it suits various political actors to present it. The herd immunity group are strongly backed by certain governments and other actors who are very much on the right, by their media and by their acolytes. And it's sort of building up quite strongly that this is now the right wing's position to let the virus go. And so you mothball older people and people who are at risk, and otherwise you don't care if young people get sick. And then the other extreme, the lockdown, is presented as being anti-business, anti-economy, even anti-people. And often it's defined as the place where the public health actors are most prominent. But it's not like that. And what I'm trying to do is to describe all the time the future state that society will need to try to attain if it's going to be able to hold this virus back and prevent it from overwhelming us. Some say to me that I should make that future state even more precise and talk about zero COVID. But I don't want to do that because it'll be really hard in Europe to move towards a situation of a continent that's free of the virus. It would require a really intense process of being able to restrict movement in certain areas when the virus builds up and potentially stigmatizing quite large numbers of people. So I'm saying don't go for zero virus, but go for a situation where as spikes appear, they can be dealt with quickly through the combination of people and systems to get it right. Now, if we're going to get that in place, then we need to be very clear that as an instrument for dealing with this disease, lockdown, i.e. the total cessation of economic and social activity in an area, only suppresses the virus by restricting the number of people who can be in contact with each other, but it doesn't get rid of the virus unless you are also doing the case detection and isolation and contact tracing and isolation routine that is so important to get rid of the disease. Yet the public debate is saying it's lockdown, yes or no, to varying degrees. But there's very little discussion about the systems that are needed to get rid of the virus. In much of Europe, it's dominated by talk about testing and testing numbers. And what we would like to say is its capacity at local level to detect the disease and then to act on the information about where the virus is, and then to isolate and make certain that people are out of the way when they are infectious, and presenting that as the heart of the work we're trying to do, those capacities, has proved to be very difficult. But for me, the only justification for a lockdown is to buy you time while you set up these basic capacities. Can you have, some people say to me, well, it's going to be really difficult. There's just not the ability at local level in Britain, in France, and certainly in many poorer countries to develop this community-based public health capacity. But I'm not going to accept that. And I mean, we have shown over the years that humanity can deal with infectious diseases. It just seems to me to be totally inappropriate to throw in the towel. So I'm suggesting that we're going to have to find ways to explain what that transmission interruption process is like, so that we can help people understand that lockdown is just a temporary measure while you build the basic capacity. And that capacity has to be available for local actors to use, because you can't run it from several hundred miles or kilometers away. Now, how are we getting on? Well, on last weekend, I decided that it was useful to try to provoke a bit more of a debate by saying very explicitly what we've been saying in WHO since February, which is lockdown should not be used as the primary means for controlling the virus. As I told you on Tuesday, this got me notoriety with the US president and others, but for all the wrong reasons. People saying that I was basically in the midst of a U-turn, and that what we were trying to do was to actually shift the whole nature of the debate and say, well, we were going to go for herd immunity and just letting go. And a lot of colleagues on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, even yesterday, were saying to me, you've been completely misreported, the wrong messages come out. And even some have said that I've gone into a dispute with Tedros, and there were several writers, particularly in the US, that were presenting it as me trying to get revenge for losing the WHO job against Tedros. So what we've been trying to do is to find journalists and opinion leaders who will actually support us and make the point that lockdown is not a primary control measure, and that it is also extremely damaging to people's lives and society, and that the basic public health elements are what we've got to get in place, with people being trusted to do the right thing at the right time, because that's what they choose to do. So we are in the midst now of a major effort to try to improve the messaging, and we'd be very grateful for all of you offering tips and suggestions to us as to how we can get it right. I don't necessarily want this to be a political discussion about what's happening in any one country or indeed what's happening globally. I'd rather we can just think through the messaging challenges, and if you've got metaphors that you think are helpful, or if you've got any other suggestions, please let me know. And I don't think this is just an issue for Europe. In my communications with colleagues in South Asia, as well as in Latin America, they've been saying they have the same problem, getting the narrative across and describing the ideal future state. And so if you've got suggestions about how to do this elsewhere, please let me know. As I mentioned, I have a session with WHO top brass at lunchtime to review the messaging challenge and to consider how we can take advantage of the discourse that's going on in different places about appropriate strategies. So anything you can offer us will be very relevant to right now. So just want to say, my colleague Catherine has had to slip out. She's got a terrible cold. So I'm going to be doing this a little bit more on improvisation, and I'm going to try and call different people in. Could I just invite John first, just to, if he's got any comments, because he and I have been talking about it. Then I want to go to Paul for any comments, and I'm actually going to go around as many of you as possible just to get quick views from your own perspectives. John, please.
Just a quick one from me, David, building on this message about getting the public health activity as well as message right. And I'm struck, and as I said to you yesterday, if my children were to hear me saying this, they'd give me another of those sort of eye-rolled sighs, because they probably heard it from me too often in my life. If you want to do something well, if you want to do it properly, there is an element of hard work and just attending to the basics that's needed. If you want to be a great footballer, you've got to be able to pass off both feet. If you want to be a great musician, you've got to do your scales and your finger exercises, and this is no different. We've got to get the basics right on public health, and that requires a bit of work. And sometimes I think herd immunity or other, hard lockdown is a bit of an escape from having to actually do the things that are necessary to do. And neither of those are a good alternative. And I think what I'm hearing, David, you see, I'm sure, because it touches you, some of the hurtful things that get said. But the other thing I'm seeing is there is quite a considerable groundswell of voice that says, yes, the middle path that you're describing is common sense, it's practical, we've got to do this work and we've got to do it well. And actually, lots and lots of people are. So that's what I'd like to add. I'll hand straight over to Paul, if you like.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for stressing that often what we pick up when we're being critiqued is just extreme perspectives. And I think there are various signs. You're saying there is a lot more discussion in the community you're engaged with about what we're calling the middle path. We've called it that last 2 or 3 weeks. I got a sign because when I do media stuff, yesterday, today, Australian media, Irish media, American media, the journalists are not sort of trying to beat me to pulp. Actually, it's quite the reverse. They're giving me space and an opportunity to try to explain what's going on. And I think journalists pick up the mood, and if they think it's right to hammer somebody, because that's what the public sentiment is, they will. And even in the UK, where it's now become super politicized, with Labour going for what they call the circuit breaker and the Conservatives going for regional action, the journalists, at least with me, have been quite keen to encourage me to be neutral and not to force me into criticizing. So you're suggesting that what you're picking up is that this is a reasonable way to go. I've got one or two indicators that say the same to me. So let's keep going with this. What are the best ways to keep the messaging going and getting it right? Paul Garner, please, if you're there. I come in.
Thanks, David. I thought when you were on the BBC, actually, the people were listening very carefully to what you had to say, because in the UK, we're just slopping around with rhetoric and words, and people were really listening to you. And so I do think public health has to get back into control of the dialogue, or influencing the dialogue. It's out of control at the moment, and you know, this local action for local control is a really important message to get across. We see Joe Anderson, mayor here in Liverpool, texting to gym owners, "Sorry, mate, this is nothing to do with me. I was told to do this. Nobody in central government is taking any notice of us." And you know, so this is really bad. And local authorities really can do something. They know where the clubs are. They know how to track the disease. They have local informed knowledge, and it has to change. So I really think pushing local control, local knowledge is a really important part of the public health messaging that we need to get across.
So, Paul, I have to ask you, the discourse that I was hearing this morning was that the local actors are really pushing back against what the centre is asking them to do, particularly in the UK situation, going from level 2 to level 3, which is a lot more restrictions. And you kind of get the feeling that at the centre, there's a sort of frustration with the local pushback, which then makes the centre want to be more top down. And do you have I mean, you've worked on so many issues over your professional life when there has to be local central negotiation around health action. Do you have a feeling, if you had the ear of the Westminster decision makers, what would you whisper into their ear?
That they should be in dialogue with helping set a framework locally for people to identify what's happening in their disease pattern and for them to deal with it. The people are completely disenfranchised at a local level. They don't really know what to do. In the first round of lockdown, I was in touch with public health people here, and they were getting no guidance about what to do. They were given no information about how they should set up surveillance systems, what they should be doing. It remains centralized, and there is an utter frustration with this. So I think the centre has to be. The problem is now that the periphery, the local level, are worried that they are now getting dumped with the blame of the disaster today, you know, so that there's an anxiety that if they then accept this control, this is a Tory government way of offloading their failure to date. So that is under the surface, but there needs to be much more dialogue, I think.
So the fear of blame is there everywhere. And I mean, obviously here in this WHO setting, we know we're going to get kicked anyway. So we kind of sort of immune to it almost, but it's not very nice when it happens. So I think I get that point about fear of blame. The other point that I got from the Manchester mayor, both when we were talking directly, but also listening to him this morning, is this anxiety about lack of cash. And I'm colleagues who are working in the north of Britain are telling me that at the heart of all this, there's a lot of nervousness that the responsibility is being handed more to local actors, but without the accompanying cash that's necessary to deal with it. And then they say, look, a rather large amount of money has been sent on a centralized testing and tracing scheme. Why hasn't some of that money moved locally? I mean, it seems like this is I'm trying not to get too involved in any one country's politics, but I pick these things up. The cash part is also important. Are you picking that up, Ian? Paul, sorry.
Not particularly, but I'm sure that is absolutely correct, because the local authorities have been starved for so long. It's a pattern that's gone on that the money, that the it's all decentralization systems. You give the local authorities the responsibility, but you don't give them any authority or any money or any resources. And then if things go wrong, you get blamed. So there's a long history of that in the UK, and particularly with Liverpool. Yeah. So I think getting money out to properly fund and give some energy to a fantastic resource in the communities and the local systems here. People would act very fast and get things set up very quickly if they were given the authority and the resources with which to do things.
Yeah. So that's Paul, quite well connected into the public health community in the northwest of the UK, and I keep you there, Paul, but quite understand if you need to pull out. Good. I see Philip Dearden is here. Phil, I don't know how often whether you've joined these things before.
No, I've been picking up all the sort of written stuff, but it's great to be here actually. Can I just quickly put a point to you, picking up on Paul's point actually.
A bit, Phil, only because we get to know each other quite well. Most of the people here are familiar with each other, and it's wonderful to see you. So just we usually have 3-minute goes and then stop. So over to you.
Just very quickly, I work in a Wolverhampton University, and a question around that, in the sense that our university is multi-campuses. Yeah. It's split between Telford and Walsall. And the messaging we have to give to students is really difficult, because we're in different zones, we're in different tiers now. And picking up on Paul's point, I just wonder whether getting stuff locally is really, really complex. The challenges around it are really serious. And this is for students, for example.
Yeah, and it's complex because you're in the end having to have different principles and different practices in different places. In your case, because you've got the campus across different tier zones, and you're saying perhaps it's too complex, and perhaps going for one single position for the whole country is in the end easier. Is that what you're implying, Phil?
No, not really implying that. I'm just pointing out, picking up on Paul's point, that this middle way, which I completely agree with, it just needs a lot of work. It just needs a lot of clear messaging.
Right. That's John, and that's John's been saying to me, we were trying to think of how do we communicate the middle way to a larger audience. He kept me, the one thing you got to say is it's not easy. It's going to require work. And real work, you know, people sitting together or Zooming together and working things out. Good point, Phil. Thank you. And we've got various people who'd like to speak. Let me just tell you who. By the way, Catherine, you're doing sterling work. Thank you very much indeed, under difficult conditions. Going to invite Rhiannon Osborne to come in. Rhiannon, nice to see you again. And tell us how you're getting on. So if you could unmute, that'd be great. Chris Langton, going to invite you. And then Joe Nichols, I saw, had written something. Lovely to hear from you as well, from Nairobi. So Rhiannon, please, over to you. I don't know where you are, Rhiannon. You still in the UK? I think so.
Yeah, I'm in the UK and I'm dipping in and out because I'm in hospitals at the moment with my, I'm just about to leave the house. Yeah, so I think the thing that I put in the chat was about the importance of presenting alternatives.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we came across in the climate movement as well, is that when people are unhappy with something, it's really easy to have this conversation, well, I'm unhappy too. And then you kind of get this kind of binary of people being unhappy for different reasons. And then I think a really important part of what you're doing, and I think very few people actually are, is saying, okay, well, the middle ground looks like this. And this is what you need, this is what the fundamentals are. And for work like access to medicines, where what you need is quite complex and quite kind of like systems based, we use recipe metaphors quite a lot, to be like, okay, well, these are the ingredients you need to make, say, a widely available vaccine, for example. And I think that kind of messaging where you acknowledge that there's lots of things that are needed, but at the same time you need to get these really basic fundamental principles right. I think that's what is really valuable about the messaging that you guys are doing.
Cool. And you know, embedded in what you've just said is you're saying it's a systems challenge. It's not a linear challenge. It's not a single element. It's probably 7 or 8 elements, and they've got to be adjusted depending on the local situation. So it's
definitely. And I think one thing about the problem with the localization in the UK that we were talking about earlier is that they're only localizing the restrictions. They're being like, okay, well, we'll have a localized thing, but it's just going to be on how restricted you are. And then it creates this whole like, oh, who's more restricted in the country? And it's really not very healthy because they've only localized the bad things. If you don't localize any of the things that you need to control the virus, then you end up with what other people have described really well earlier.
So that's incredibly useful. And thank you. And just my brother, William, who's on the other side of the screen, was saying to me yesterday, yeah, the cash part matters a lot. Don't dismiss that. And cash plus, cash and test results. Thank you, Renan. Where are you at the moment? Which city are you in?
I'm in Cambridge.
All right. So you're going to Addenbrooke's or you're going to another?
Yeah. And I'm going to have to drop off now because I have to cycle to Addenbrooke's.
So, thanks for joining us and please keep in touch. That's great.
Yeah, nice to see you all. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay. So let's go to Chris Langdon. Chris, I see you. I think I saw you just now. And
yes. Can you hear me okay?
Joe Nichols as well. Chris, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. John, were you making a sign saying you wanted to speak or just you were telling Chris?
No, just telling Chris he can be heard.
Good. Okay. Thanks, John. I thought what Rhiannon said was really good. When she's back from Addenbrooke's, you should talk to her some more. Yes. I think there was I'm an old style sort of communications person, but I heard a lot of very good thoughts from what she was just saying. Yeah. Now, in terms of the sensitivity to the communications, there are things I might wish to say to you in TUI privately. I don't want to say on a public channel like this, but I think it's good you're having the meeting with the WHO to talk about better communications and also crisis management and what to do when things go wrong. Things do go wrong, and it's often the skill in communications is what you then do to right them. And I'll come back to a couple of suggestions and mention a couple of friends of yours by first name who might help you on that. We are in a very tricky phase between now and the 4th of November. A lot of stuff will hit the fan. People will be looking to find faults because there is still a likelihood now, and I think this is part of the interesting thing. I do a lot of work in the States. Who might be in the White House from January the 20th? There was a very fine team in Health and Human Services under Obama, and those people are starting to get together for whether they'll go back in. How you tap into that change and stay safe in the next 3 weeks, I think, is really important because there will be an awful lot of problems, let alone the issue of the way the coronavirus has got out of control for many governments. So I think there's a question you need to consider what you have the resources for on your Twitter feed, which is excellent on the food security, whether you need to have the ability to rebut when people misquote you. So both you have stuff there for journalists, but also you can prove to the WHO that you are trying to improve the messaging where you've been possibly willfully or accidentally misquoted. Yeah. Now, I'll mention a couple of people who know much more about that sort of stuff than you, but on Tuesday, issues of having the right definition, what's a lockdown, clear messaging. And I said to Twee I'd have a quick look at the latest narrative. I think it's 780 words, it's too long. You have these wonderful graphics artists, use them. And also think about better language about the middle way, beating the virus rather than to hold the virus at bay. Maybe picking up, you have to be careful about the language about binary because it has other meanings these days politically. But the idea how you beat this duopoly of discussion, we can think of a better phrase. So you really put that at the front of the message. Well, it's now in paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your core message this morning is in paragraph 6 here.
Yeah.
You know, don't bury the lead. If you think there is a really attractive message with the middle way, this is how we have to get out of this stuck logic. A lot of people will listen.
Okay.
And just a couple of other points to say, if I could, you are literally walking on a tightrope. So you have to think about crisis communications, political communications, talk to experts who know about that. There are, you know, all campaigns have rebuttal specialists, others about who know how you keep the messages. You have, Scott referred to him the other day, you have a friend in New York called Richard. Could he delegate somebody to help you? Really smart to work with. Tui, I think, is doing an excellent job about how you basically get the messaging clearer, how you do the crisis communications. I think that's really very important. Two other things. I was concerned on the call the other day when somebody talked about criticizing journalists. There are bad journalists, there are bad in every profession. I think it's very exciting the way you're talking much more constructively. I'm finding this conversation today much better than Tuesdays, if I may be honest, about how you engage with journalists, not who support you, but who can prepared to take an interesting argument which you're raising forward. So rather than attacking journalists. And one thing I do want to encourage you to do as a technical issue, but is make sure you've got your cybersecurity really watertight. If somebody wants to take down the WHO, frankly, you are a soft target by comparison. I'm sure your comms and your cybersecurity. There are people like Microsoft who can provide some support. I can tell you how to connect with that. I have mentioned it to Tui a few weeks ago. I've been rather busy, but just make sure that you have the means to defend yourself while you work out a calibrated, careful middle way strategy and engage. And one last thing about the WHO, as well as all the sort of centralized stuff that people know about, I have to say that work of the teams in EpiWin is really exciting. Some of the people they have, the young people, there was a young Singaporean doctor. I think you should be amplifying some of their work. I think you'll find they certainly energized a whole stack of us on a call the other day. You might find, because I can see you're feeling a little bit tired from just watching you, get in some of those really good things that are within the WHO and help amplify them. And that might help secure some of the security with some of the more senior bosses who are a little bit worried about whether you're going off message. So that you're seen to be supporting, that they're doing really good work. So carry on, but I do think you need to be much more prepared for a coming political as well as health storm.
Chris, thank you very, very much indeed. Everybody is listening and listening to every word, not just me. I'm the front. Thank you, Chris. Good. I'm just thinking, my brother William, did you want to comment on what Chris just said or anything you've heard?
On what Chris has said, I just agree 100%. I've said to you before, I say it again, next 3 weeks, the intensity of political point scoring and the bitterness and virulence of it just cannot but increase. And the WHO is a terribly easy target. You know, it's the collateral target to China, which will just continuously get it in the neck. And you will get the collateral. Two other points very quickly. First, Paul was making the point about the need for cash to local public health. I think the need for cash is wider than that. The need for cash arises because every restriction threatens people's livelihoods. And unless the compensation is seen to be there and generous, then compliance is going to be impacted, and it contributes to local leaders' obligation to resist what is wished upon them by national leaders. And the second point, I'd say, which was John's point earlier about both lockdown and the sort of letting the virus rip strategies, are a recognition that the virus is out of control, that we have lost control of the disease. And the only way of addressing that is by a real focus on the management and funding of public health and the way in which it's delivered. And that has to be the continuous focus. In the absence of that, if people are just saying, this is all going to hell, then of course you're into blame, and blame leads to public disagreements, whether it's within government or between national and local government and so on. And that's where we are in the UK, but I suspect the same is true in France, for example.
Yeah, it's quite widespread. Thank you very much indeed. Great. Joe Nichols, you, and the relationship with us is, we've done other ones before, so go in as tough as you like. Over to you, Joe.
Okay, so 2 points. One is about the range of choices. And at the moment, a lot of people are really tired with this, and people, I think there's an exhaustion about the amount of information, the range of choices, you know, the number of things you have to take into account when you're making a basic decision about how to leave your house in the morning. And I think tired people want more clarity and less complexity. And we all know that kids especially make much better choices when they have 2 or 3 options, not when they have dozens of options. So I think something that helps you cut through the range of complicated issues is super helpful. Something else that seems to have happened is that the time that we're all living in seems to have both kind of slowed down and got longer, but also become massively concentrated. And recently we've just been planning for return to office and looking through all the guidelines for return to office. And when I first worked on this in June, the WHO guidance was super up to date because it was from June, and we were all immediately looking to that guidance because it was the latest. But it was very interesting this time because so many things have changed, and people go to the WHO website and they think, oh God, June, that's ages ago. It's completely out of date. And they'll download something from a different website because it has an October date on it, even if it's not a reputable website. And it feels like even just by reiterating or reissuing or redating things from WHO, it might provide that extra confidence that they're not way behind the curve and that you don't divert people to newer and perhaps incorrect information. So just a couple of thoughts.
That is great. Thank you, Joe. Joe, you're in Nairobi at the moment, and we've been chit-chatting away about some of the aspects of the response around you, and generally you've been remarkably upbeat about it. Are you still?
I mean, I'm working on Somalia, and Somalia, even in sort of surprise testing environments where, you know, they were just trying to check what the prevalence of COVID was getting really quite low percentages. In the last couple of weeks, some of the random tests right in the northeast, right in the Horn of Africa, Puntland, have been up to 50% positivity. And there are definitely challenges, both in terms of finding the right availability of resources to respond to that, but also I think getting a shift back to a more not negative, but more cautious political message. And in Kenya, the percentage positivity has gone back up to about 10, 11, 12% in about the last week. Oof. So I think I think the caution has evaporated a little bit, and it probably needs to settle back down again. People need to be a bit more aware that it could really spiral in the wrong direction.
Gosh, I didn't realize that the percent, but everybody, if your testing strategies remain pretty constant and your percentage positive in your test starts to go up from 4% to 10 to 15%, then you know that there's suddenly a really big splurge in cases, even if you're not measuring a big increase in number. That percent positivity on testing is a useful index. And I've got the figures here in front of me for the US, which is showing some incredibly disturbing trends on that. But I was just looking for Kenya. I'll look for it later. Thank you very much, Joe. Now, Anne Hendricks-Jones, what's great about you, Anne, is that you have a very, I think, very a clear capacity to articulate working locally and what's needed to make it happen. And you've been doing it in so many different places, and you've heard some of the challenges that are picking up in different parts of Europe. Would you have any comments? Over to you.
Thanks for the opportunity. I think this idea of trying to work from whatever the local perspective is. So in a lot of the places we're working in Africa, you know, they're not seeing a lot of COVID, so it doesn't feel like an immediate danger to them. Yeah. But what we are saying is that let's use this time of upheaval to leverage a different world afterwards. Yeah. And there have been a lot of people who have been advocating for more attention to integrated local food production, and from a nutrition point of view. And now the nutrition message has become fighting COVID starts inside the body with a strong immune system. And then what does that mean? Some of the international supply chains have been interrupted. Cash crops are not good in a time like this. So how do we use this time to leverage a shift to integrated local nutrition? People can get on board with that because they think that that's relevant no matter what, COVID or not COVID. Yeah. But at the same time, linking it to the COVID discussion helps us keep that line of communication open about what COVID is and what it can look like, and how to prevent it and recognize it and care for it without sort of trying to tell them to do a bunch of things that they don't feel are relevant to their lives at this point. So I hope that helps.
I'd just like to tell you that in the discussions we had this week during the Committee on Food Security, we were able to use a rather elegantly developed issues paper that's been put together by people who I think know what they're talking about on the impacts of COVID on food security and nutrition, and developing appropriate policy responses. If you haven't seen it, it's on the website of the Committee on Food Security, or CFS. And it looks like this. I really commend it to you. It's got the Committee on Food Security logo on it. It's on their website. And and I'm really pleased to end on that, because, you know, we are facing everywhere challenges with the narrative being deliberately perverted for political and other reasons. And Chris has pointed out we've got to watch out for that and not be naive. You don't get left alone just because you're being nice. In fact, naivety is a real risk at the moment. Secondly, there are some massive issues in Europe about trying to strengthen local action, especially when governments want to do things very much from the center for electoral and other reasons. And thirdly, there are some communities who are saying, we've had troubles with COVID, can we do better in other areas? Or COVID has revealed weaknesses, can we deal with those weaknesses? And one of them is food, and it was just pleasing for me that we finished there. I'm going to close now, and before I close, I'm just going to say to Twee, would you like to come back again to reflect on the discussion and also to talk about your own findings, and perhaps to do a little piece of promotion about something we're doing next week?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. These sessions are so valuable for all of us, and I encourage all of you just to keep the conversation going on that LinkedIn community chat. I'm finding it super valuable, and it's feeding into a lot of decisions we're making going ahead. One exciting thing we will be doing in 2 weeks' time on October the 27th, Tuesday, our usual time slot, 5 p.m. Central European Time, is a special school session being organized with the International School of Kenya, thanks to Joe Nichols, and the Q&A will be moderated by her daughter Zara Breeden, who we see who is our youth champion on these calls. So please have a look at that. You'll find the flyer on the community chat, and please share it. Invite other people you think who'll be interested, students, concerned parents, teachers, headmasters. Please, let's make that a super lively and youthful session. Thank you.
Thank you to Twee. You didn't tell us about the survey result. Any surprises?
The usual, well, we have, great to see we at least have 2 people from East Asia and Pacific region, which is great for this time slot. I know Anna Main, you are one of those people. For the age range, good spread, very good spread today. And then, and how we're all feeling today, mostly optimistic and hopeful like usual. So that's always good to see. And no one has ticked anything in the lower 3 emotions, the negative emotions there, which is good to see.
To all of you who've not spoken, it's just been lovely to welcome you here. And Jan Hardacre, thank you for joining. If you want to connect, we can connect you into the WhatsApp group. Many of you are in the WhatsApp group. Special shout outs to Vicky Doyle and to Nazim for singing us so beautiful songs, and to all of you who've been writing in the WhatsApp. But most importantly, thanks for helping us to find our way through this. And it's not going to get easier. It'll be tougher, as has been pointed out by Chris. So with that, a very big goodbye to you all, and have a good weekend, and see you again if you want to on Tuesday. And don't hesitate to connect